All right, it's about 11 o'clock in the morning. Want to give you an update on what's going on with Irene. A lot to talk about here. This could be a pretty significant storm for the Carolina coast. There's a couple caveats in this, but the one thing to take away from all of this is we've got a good 5 days now. This storm is going to approach the Carolina coast late Friday into Saturday morning, give or take 12 to 24 hours depending on the track. You need to start planning now, especially along the coast and even inland sections. Start getting a mental plan together for power outages as well as some flooding. That would be our concern. The farther west you go, not as much a concern, but eastern North Carolina and all of the low country of South Carolina, something to keep an eye on. So let's get right into the details. You see off to the right here, this is the storm right now. This is Hurricane Irene, our first hurricane of the 2011 hurricane season. The center is right in the middle of your screen where you see this blow up of thunderstorm activity. This is Puerto Rico, all kinds of flood warnings. The key thing here is that the system is going to stay north of Hispaniola, which is the island with the Dominican Republic and Haiti. Now, while it won't pass over the island, it will have a little bit of an influence on the storm because as south winds try to wrap into this low-level circulation that is intensifying, these 10,000-foot peaks in here will interrupt the flow a little bit. Not significantly, but enough that it may not strengthen right away until it gets up here into the Bahamas. So that kind of leads me to the track. This is the 11 a.m. advisory on Hurricane Irene. And don't focus on the center. There's a reason we don't put a line in the middle. It's really this whole area from the east coast of Florida all the way to the Outer Banks of North Carolina that we have to keep an eye on. And one of the things I really like looking at is the tropical storm probability winds. This is actually probably a much better way to kind of envision how the storm is going to track. You look at all the area that could be threatened all the way to Charlotte into the eastern part of the state, and this is the probability that you're going to see tropical storm force winds. And notice where things are kind of zeroing in on in those areas. So let's take a look at the models. This is often what we call the spaghetti plots. You see these all the time. They're pretty consistent here early on in the track. Notice how they're all clustered together. But as you get up through the Bahamas, that's where things kind of go crazy. There's a huge spread from the west coast of Florida all the way to curving out to sea. Now, both of those possibilities are still in there, but I think this one on the west side is a little less likely than the east side. It should be known that it is a possibility this storm could recurve and miss everything. But the thing that worries me is the storm gets up here in the Bahamas. I'm going to talk about this in a moment. The atmosphere is ripe there for intensification. The bigger this storm gets, the harder it is to move. I always equate it to ships. Small ships, let's say a jet ski, very maneuverable. Big cruise ships, hard to move and turn. So the bigger this gets, the harder it will be to turn. As you look at the steering currents, it's pretty evident what's going on here. Ridge of high pressure over the southern plains in the middle of the country, trough of low pressure on the east coast, and then out here in the Atlantic, we got our subtropical ridge, which is spinning clockwise. That's really forcing it. This storm wants to go up here towards this trough, the weakness between these two ridges, and recurve. Part of the problem is the orientation of the coast here is going to make this a pretty difficult setup. If you look at the wind shear, there's not much shear over the Bahamas. You see this area in green and blue? There's really no shear there, so it's moving to an environment that's much more favorable. If you look at the dry air is not overwhelming here. It's actually doing pretty good. There's actually more dry air to the east than there is to the west, so dry air is not an issue. And water temperatures out ahead of this are almost 90 degrees in the Bahamas, so you've got a sauna down there of warm water, low shear, and relatively moist air. As you take a look at some of the other model data, this is our GFS, which I dare say has actually done surprisingly well with this storm. You see it approaching the coast as a monster up towards the South Carolina coast early Saturday morning, and then kind of recurving into the eastern part of North Carolina, and then eventually out through the Chesapeake Bay and maybe affecting New England. As you look at our high resolution model, this is the 10-meter winds. This has been not doing a great job with the track. It's a little too far south. This actually interferes with parts of the Dominican Republic and Haiti a little too much. I really don't think that's going to happen at this time. I think it's going to stay further north. But you see how big the wind field gets, and that's kind of key. The wind field actually begins to spread out quite a bit as this storm moves over or just to the north of Hispaniola. So you see how big the wind field gets as it moves just to the north of the islands. Now, intensity models, this is what we look at for intensity. All of the models are doing a pretty slow, steady build up to a Cat 3, maybe even a Cat 4. certainly stronger is possible, but usually strong storms can't maintain themselves for that long. So it could spike up to a Cat 4 and kind of bounce around. But I think consistently strong Cat 2 to Category 3 is a good possibility as this approaches the Carolina coastline. These two models are kind of out to lunch. I think that's because they were anticipating an interaction with Hispaniola. That's not likely. So we will see a steady increase in the intensity of Irene. Now, if you look at some of the model errors, I like looking at this. These are average position error of the models. Look at the spread so far. Actually, if you look at some of the ensemble means, some of the ensemble's members of the GFS have actually been doing the best with the track. This APO4, which is one version of the GFS ensembles, it's one of the deviations there. It's actually been only 6 miles off. So some of the models associated with the GFS ensemble forecast has been pretty good. Intensity forecast, the good old ships has been pretty good. And so is some of the other models from the Hurricane Center that they use. This statistical modeling has done pretty well. Some of the other models have been way off on their intensification. So when you look at the errors, it kind of gives you an idea what you're looking at. So we go back to the water vapor loop. I think it's pretty clear what's going to happen here as it approaches the coast. Clearly, it's going to move up towards the North Carolina coast, and then you start getting into where things get kind of dicey. So we take a look at it again. I'm going to throw on here real quick. This is the official forecast track, which just came out. You see Cat 1, Cat 1, Cat 1, likely not intensifying too much till it gets over here away from the big mountains of Haiti and Hispaniola and the Dominican Republic down there. It becomes a Cat 2, then becomes a Cat 3 over the Bahamas. Remember, these islands have very little impact on storms, but they do have a lot of warm, shallow water over the Bahamas. Then it moves north. It's a Cat 3, and then if you were to draw a line, it has it right near Charleston. But remember, I think actually anywhere from the Outer Banks down to Jacksonville, still a possibility. But I would lean, if there's going to be a shift or an error in the forecast, it seems to be to the right now. So areas from Myrtle Beach to Wilmington, I think you're going to start to see the track focusing on these areas. And part of the problem with forecasting landfalls and why I don't want to focus on a line is the orientation of the coast. This storm is moving north, so it's paralleling the coast to the west, and then you have this long coastline which juts out to the Outer Banks between North and South Carolina, and any little deviation in the track could have huge impacts on the coast because of the way the coast is oriented. This thing isn't moving towards a perpendicular line. This is an angled coast, and then you got all these nooks and crannies here, obviously, of the Grand Strand, and then up towards Bald Head Island and Oak Island there, towards Southport, up towards Wilmington. Then you got another one in Carteret County near Atlantic Beach and Morehead City. So all these little notches here can play havoc not only with storm surge, but the location of the center. And clearly anybody on the east side is going to get it worse than the west side. So folks, inland areas, while you may have some wind and rain, the worst is going to be on the right side of the track. And as you look at some of the models, you start looking at some of them, they're all trending off to the east, or basically shifting east more and more. So we'll keep an eye on it. There's a couple models that I'm still looking at that I'm a little favoring more than others, but anywhere on the North and South Carolina coast, from all the way down to Hilton Head to the Outer Banks, you need to start preparing for a strong Cat 2, possibly Cat 3 hurricane. It's been a while since we've been affected. Of course, I'll keep you up to date online on Facebook, Twitter, as well as WCNT.com. I'll be on the air today at 4. We'll talk more about the possibilities, but needless to say, start preparing now.